Welcome, dear friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery. As usual, before I begin, I'd like to pay homage. Let's pay homage together to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So very, very warm greetings to you all. And I'm going to speak today on the topic of King Pasenadi, King Pasenadi's last day. I picked this title after reading a sutta last week. It's a very poignant, very touching sutta about indeed the last day of this person who was a great leader, and also a disciple of the Buddha, a very devoted disciple of the Buddha. He was a devoted disciple, but he wasn't fully engaged in practice because he was very involved in all the affairs of state. You know, as a king, he was deeply immersed and enmeshed in samsara. He was punishing people, he was exiling people, he was having people executed, he was making great sacrifices, public sacrifices. He was surrounded by people, and some of those people were devoted to him and others were working against him. And so, you know, he was able to meet the Buddha, which is wonderful. He was able to receive the Buddha's teachings. He understood them to the degree that he became a stream enterer, but he was unable to go further in his practice during his lifetime. And there are so many teachings the Buddha gave to Pasenadi, King Pasenadi. So many recorded instances, you know, of them conversing. It's very beautiful to read all of these suttas. They're all very engaging teachings. The whole chapter on kings in Majjhima Nikaya is full of teachings with King Pasenadi. And I'm going to just touch on a few of those suttas in the 80s, Majjhima Nikaya. And also in Samyutta Nikaya, there's an entire section devoted to encounters between King Pasenadi and the Buddha. And that's Samyutta number 3, section 3. And I'd like to, just select a couple of suttas from there. But I do recommend, as I put in the suggested reading, you know, to have a look at this whole section in Samyutta Nikaya, as well as these suttas in the chapter on kings in Majjhima Nikaya. So before I begin, I'm going to have a look and see. Just want to greet you, those who've put your greetings in the chat. Hi, Rebecca, Geetha, Chittapala, Margaret. Hi, Gregory. Hi, Manal, Madeline, and Heike from Ireland. Madeline from the UK. And Yankee Apple, maybe from the States. Good to see you all present, and thank you for your practice. So, King Pasenadi was the ruler of a country at the time of the Buddha called Kosala. And the capital of Kosala was Savatthi. And Savatthi is the place where the Buddha spent more time than anywhere else during his ministry from the time he became the Buddha. Indeed, we get the impression that, you know, in his middle years all the way through to his old age, he spent the Vasas at least in Savatthi, in Anathapindika's park, the monastery that was donated to the Sangha by Anathapindika, who bought it from the royal family. And there were other places also in Savatthi where the monks, the nuns, the monastics had places to practice. They had a lot of support to practice because this king, Pasenadi, was an ardent supporter of the Buddha. So very conducive environment, and King Pasenadi had the Buddha and many of the Buddha's disciples living in his country, in his capital where he resided. How wonderful is that? King Pasenadi met the Buddha when he was quite a young man. They were the same age exactly. So he would have been perhaps in his late 30s or early 40s when he first met the Buddha. And he at that time questioned the Buddha, why would you become a renunciant when you're so young and fit and you come from a good family, you can enjoy all the sense pleasures that life has to offer? And the Buddha explained to him, why he would renounce the world, and that the king needed to be very respectful, as we all do, of young renunciants, because a young person who renounces the world is a wise person. And they are, therefore, even though the body might be young, the mind, the heart is senior, elder in such cases. And so the Buddha advised King Pasenadi to be very respectful of even the youngest monastics. There's a sutta in the Majjhima, Angulimala Sutta, where, as many of you will know, Angulimala, the serial killer, had become a bhikkhu, and he was with the Buddha. He'd been murdering people in King Pasenadi's country, and the king himself was terrified of Angulimala, the bandit. But when Angulimala became a bhikkhu, ahimsa, harmless one, and follower of the Buddha, King Pasenadi came to visit the Buddha one day, and there was ex-Angulimala, garland of fingers, serial killer. And King Pasenadi was terrified to see him there, recognized who he was, sitting amongst the company around the Buddha. And the Buddha explained to King Pasenadi, this is a monk now. This person is a bhikkhu. And immediately King Pasenadi, perhaps remembering that teaching of old, or rather from when he was young, he immediately prostrated to this bhikkhu, ahimsa, the ex-serial killer, and he offered him the requisites. King Pasenadi was very open to the Buddha's teachings, but he didn't always understand, and he didn't always follow those teachings. There's one occasion when, again, one of the 80s in Majjhima, one of the 80 suttas, there was a man who lost his son, and he was distraught, and he came to the Buddha, and he couldn't accept what had happened. And the Buddha said to him, as part of his teaching, to help him through this period of resistance and denial and desperate grief and despair, he said to him, you can observe that it is those who are dearest to us that cause us the most suffering. And this teaching went around the town, and the queen, Malika, King Pasenadi's wife, heard this teaching, and she was a follower of the Buddha. She immediately got it, accepted the teaching, considered it, contemplated it, and told it to the king. And when King Pasenadi heard this teaching, he was appalled and resisted the truth of the teaching, got quite annoyed with his wife, with the queen, and sent her away. And the sutta goes, she was wanting to explore more deeply the implications, the meaning of this teaching, that those who are dearest to us causes the most suffering. And so she sent a messenger to the Buddha and asked him to explain further. And so he did. And then she took this teaching back to the king, and she said to him, questioned him, your daughter, your beloved daughter, if anything should happen to her, how would you feel? Your son, any of those and all of those dear to you. She sort of went through a list of the various characters in King Pasenadi's life, close to him. And he considered her words, her question, and he realized, yes, of course, it is true that those who are dearest to us cause us the most suffering, because when some change, some alteration takes place in their well-being, in their life, how painful it is for us. And he, once he'd got it and he considered the teaching, listened to his wife, taken in the Dhamma, he put himself in a very respectful posture, and he paid homage to the Buddha then and there and praised the Buddha. King Pasenadi was a great devotee of the Buddha. Being a king, being the top of the pyramid of power, he was in a very difficult position, of course, as those in positions of leadership are. It's very difficult, is it not to compromise one's virtue in such a position. And King Pasenadi was asked the Buddha often about questions around his position and the social order of the day. There's another sutta in the Majjhima 80s where King Pasenadi is asking the Buddha, is there any difference between those high-born, high caste, of high social status, those with power and privilege, and those who are lower status, who are underprivileged, less privileged, of lower status in the eyes of some, in the eyes of society, perhaps. And the Buddha said, well, yes, of course there's a difference, but the King Pasenadi was really asking him, what's the difference in terms of their karma, their destination, their destiny, their spiritual standing, their well-being in the heart. And the Buddha immediately said, oh, there's no difference in terms of birth. The difference between people is in terms of how they speak, act, and think. The degree of virtue that they have, the degree of virtue that they accumulate, that they manifest, or the lack. That is what distinguishes between people. That is what matters. And of course, we all know this. King Pasenadi sort of knew this, and he celebrated this teaching. And he was, somebody who was able to relate to the less privileged members of his community. He wasn't standing in a position of superiority, and yet he had great power. That power, he, as many do, it's very difficult perhaps not to, he made mistakes and he compromised his virtue in various ways. It's very poignant. So I want to speak about this particular sutta, Majjhima 89. It's called Monuments to the Dhamma, Dhammacettiya Sutta. I want to speak about this sutta because this was the culmination of King Pasenadi's life. We see in this sutta, it's a real constellation of events for him. He was in his country in some quite remote area, and he had with him a general, like a commander-in-chief of the army. And this attendant that King Pasenadi had with him was a faithful attendant, but his uncle and many of his cousins had been put to death by King Pasenadi. Some ministers gave King Pasenadi the impression that this person, Bandula, this uncle of the general who was with him, that this uncle had betrayed him in some way. And so he put to death this man and all of his sons, all of his children, maybe. The whole family were executed or exiled. Apart from this general, his branch of the family. And so this was King Pasenadi's close attendant. And you can imagine, and of course, in a way, this person was equivocal in his support for King Pasenadi and got to know King Pasenadi's son very well, probably since childhood. And King Pasenadi's own son was plotting against him to take over, usurp him. This is something that happened in a neighboring country also. King Bimbisara's son, Ajatasattu. As many of you will know who read and study the suttas, quite famously, Ajatasattu deposed his father, imprisoned him, and let him starve to death. And this was the neighboring kingdom. And they're all kind of related, as royal families often are. And so there was this Ajatasattu, who deposed his father, King Bimbisara, was actually the son-in-law of King Pasenadi. And they were friendly, and yet King Pasenadi's son was plotting against him. And this general was ready to harm him if any opportunity should come about. So he's surrounded by devotees, he's surrounded by enemies. And so many things that he'd done in his life were creating unfortunate future dukkha, suffering for him. A mix of good and bad. King Pasenadi, on this particular day, he felt like going to a park to take some exercise, to be out in nature. So he goes to this park, and the general's with him, and the king's walking around, enjoying the nature. And, on that day, in that place, King Pasenadi thought of the Buddha. And he started remembering meetings he'd had with the Buddha in similar places, similar settings. And the thought occurred to him, where is the Buddha? Where is he now? And he asked the general. And in fact, Buddha was not too far away. He was a few hours' journey by carriage away from this place where King Pasenadi was. And so the general said, if we go now, we'll have time, just enough time to get to see the Buddha in the daylight. And King Pasenadi followed his inclination to see the Buddha. And they went to the place where the Buddha was staying, some small bit of forest somewhere, I think, in that country at that time. And he got out of the carriage when they got close by, and just taking the general and a few others with him, he went into the forest to see the Buddha. And the conversation, the meeting between them was very touching, friends. I want to read you a little bit from this sutta. So, King Pasenadi entered the place where the Buddha was. He prostrated himself at the Blessed One's feet, and then he covered the Blessed One's feet with kisses, caressing them with his hands, and he pronounced his name, I am King Pasenadi of Kosala. And the Buddha, said to King Pasenadi, what are you doing this extreme honor to this body for? Why are you greeting me in this way today. And then King Pasenadi launched into what are known as the monuments to the Dhamma, which the Buddha afterwards encouraged his disciples to learn and to remember. King Pasenadi said this. He said, "Venerable Sir, the reason I'm treating you with such great honor is that I infer, according to Dhamma, the Blessed One is fully enlightened. The Dhamma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One. The Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples are practicing well." And he said, "Why do I say this? These are the reasons why I say this." He said, "I see some monastics leading spiritual life for 10 or 20 years, and then they revert to the household life. They revert to sense pleasures, delighting in sense pleasures, losing themselves in samsara. But here I see your disciples leading the holy life in purity as long as life and breath last. I do not see any other disciples of any other spiritual teachers living in such a pure way with such dedication for the whole life." Again, he said, "Kings quarrel with kings, warrior nobles with warrior nobles, householders with householders, mother with child, child with mother, father with mother, etc. Friend with friend. But here I see monastics enjoying concord, living as undisputed as milk and water, blending together and viewing one another with kindly eyes. I do not see any other groups, gatherings, assemblies who behave in such a harmonious way as these." Again, he said, "I've walked and I've wandered from park to park, garden to garden." At this point, King Pasenadi, like the Buddha, is 80 years old. I have seen monks and spiritual practitioners of all different kinds looking wretched, unsightly, jaundiced, with veins standing out on their limbs. Surely one would feel that one would not wish to look upon them. I suppose what he's really saying, isn't he, friends, is uninspiring, physically at least, to look at. And he went on to say, "But I see your disciples, smiling, cheerful, sincerely joyful, plainly delighting, their faculties fresh, they're uninvolved in activity, unruffled, subsisting on what others give, abiding with minds aloof as a wild deer's." And I think, King Pasenadi said, I think, surely those venerable ones are benefiting in this practice. And he goes on to say, "As a king, I can have people executed, have people fined, have people exiled when it seems the right thing to do. But when I'm sitting in council, I'm interrupted by the people around me. And I say to them, please don't interrupt me. Allow me to finish what I'm saying." But they still interrupt me. When I see you, the Blessed One, sitting amongst the Sangha, those who are practicing, there's not even the sound of anyone clearing their throat. This is wonderful. This is marvelous. Your assembly is so disciplined without any threat of punishment this impressed King Pasenadi also. He went on to say, I've seen scholars, learned people of all the different social strata come to you determined to refute your teachings, to find fault with your speech, your argument, the points that you're making, to turn you around, to worst you in debate. Brilliant speakers, brilliant debaters, very intelligent. And they come to you and they approach you, and in a very short time, they forget all about their argument with you and their wish to defeat you in debate, and they listen to your teachings and they become your disciples. King Pasenadi had seen this happen again and again. We can read about this in the suttas. On many occasions, the Buddha had these interactions with people who were able to open their hearts to the Dharma and let go of their ideas. This too impressed King Pasenadi. And then he said, I have 2 inspectors, and they're disciples of yours also. They follow your teachings also. And they show more respect to you than they do to me, the king, the one who provides them with their livelihood and their position in society. They owe all they have to me. But when I was traveling with them and we had to stay in cramped quarters, they found out where you were staying, the Buddha, and they had their heads facing the direction where you were and their feet pointing to my head. This didn't upset King Pasenadi, it impressed him. He was impressed by their devotion to the Buddha. And then finally, King Pasenadi gives this monument to the Dhamma. He said, you are a warrior noble, a Khattiya caste in the time of the Buddha. And I too am a Khattiya. This was the ruling caste. The Brahmins, the holy ones, the Khattiyas, the warriors, the merchants, and the lower caste, the workers. And so they're of the same caste. We're of the same caste. You are a Kosalan, and I too am a Kosalan. The Blessed One is 80, and I am 80. Since that is so, King Pasenadi said, I therefore think it proper to do extreme honor to the Buddha and to show such friendship to you. And then King Pasenadi, having made all of these announcements, really the praises of the Buddha, his honoring, his veneration of the Buddha and the Buddha's disciples, he then said, I have to go now. It was getting dark. He had to get back to his city. And like I touched on before, the Buddha said to the monastics around him, after King Pasenadi had left, he said, this King Pasenadi has uttered monuments to the Dhamma before rising from his seat and departing. Learn the monuments to the Dhamma, remember them. The monuments to the Dhamma are conducive to welfare and they belong to the principles of the holy life. So this is an encouragement for us all. We don't have to be monastics to appreciate the teachings here. The harmony of the Sangha, that we are people of peace, that we're not disputing with one another, that we do everything we can to harmonize, that we're living virtuous lives, that we are happy in that. You know, the result of virtue, of course, is well-being here and now. We're avoiding harm. And it's not necessarily always easy not to feel completely blameless in this world, friends. There are so many things going on around us in the world that are extremely wicked. And we are sometimes liable to feel complicit in that wickedness, because perhaps our nation states, our empires are involved in great harm, in great evil, and we could say great ignorance, doing, thinking, speaking in ways that are exceedingly unwholesome. And we can see the suffering in the world around us. Some of it is due to other causes and conditions, but some of it, much of it, we can read about in the news, for instance, is due to human actions, ways of thinking, ways of relating to one another. We can villainize one another, we can discount one another, we can feel that there are indeed different castes, there are indeed different degrees of worth in our brothers and sisters around us. And all of this delusion can create enormous amounts of dissociation, lack of empathy. And so on a national scale, en masse, we can see great harm. Famines, wars, enforced starvation, genocide, all of these things playing out around us. And we can feel very complicit, we can feel responsible. And that's good in a way, because we all have a part to play. That is, we all have an opportunity to speak and to act, to defend those who need defending, to speak up for the disenfranchised, to speak out against great harm. And yet at the same time, we can realize, we can appreciate that we have a certain amount of agency, and that is, we have the choice, isn't it, whether to act or speak or think in harmful ways, and whether to renounce that, refrain from that, and to develop in goodness. And we can do this. And in doing this, just as in this beautiful monument of the Dhamma, where King Pasenadi is saying, well, the monastics are so joyful, they're so happy, they look so well, they are well in themselves, so too we can be well in ourselves. It's okay to be happy, it's okay to be joyful, it's okay to appreciate the goodness of our lives, and to work for ever more polishing, purifying, refining of that goodness. And then to open to more clearly, in a way, to be able to open to where the harm is happening around us, and to try to harmonize, and sometimes to speak out against wickedness and wrongdoing in the world, because that needs to be done with compassion, with care, with compassion for all involved, because one can see that people right now are suffering terribly through the cruelty of others. Great compassion for that, but also those who are depriving others of food and water, who are harming and hurting others through warfare. They are harming themselves as much. And great compassion for the ignorance that creates such behaviors, where people are often part of a narrative that extends to huge numbers of people, certain belief systems, certain ways of thinking that have been cultivated over long periods of time, that as part of that narrative enable great cruelty. It's very difficult for people to extract themselves from situations of national delusion. It's very hard for the individual to step aside from all of that. To speak out against that is even harder. So we can have great compassion for the wrongs that are done in our name or in the name of others. You know, looking around us. When we're practicing the Dharma, we can see the dangers in samsara, and we can, you know, really open our hearts and allow our hearts to break again and again, and keep working for harmlessness, keep working for the good. King Pasenadi was a fairly, perhaps one could say, standard leader. He did some good things and he did some bad things. He made mistakes. He was involved in suffering, the brutalization of others to some extent. King Ashoka, who came along many hundreds of years after the Buddha's parinibbana, became a Buddhist, having harmed tremendously in his position of power, having, you know, invaded other countries and been responsible for the murder through war of so many people. But he had a change of heart and he became a Buddhist. And from that point, King Ashoka was able to really follow the Buddha's teachings, and he was promoting, promulgating, encouraging, even enforcing, in a way, harmlessness in his realm. We still have the Ashokan pillars scattered around India today, where King Ashoka would erect these pillars in stone, carved in stone on these pillars, the teachings of the Buddha, to encourage people to practice. And of course, that involved leading a harmless life. This is what King Ashoka himself did once he became a Buddhist. King Pasenadi was less clear in his actions, his thoughts, his speech during his reign. And so some good things, some not so good things happened for him. At the end of this time with the Buddha, this spontaneous wish to see the Buddha, to worship the Buddha, and to speak out in praise of the Buddha, these monuments to the Dhamma. You know, at the end of this time, King Pasenadi found, as he left the forest, went back to the carriages to take him back to his capital, to his city, he found that he'd been deserted. And his general had betrayed him. He'd made off with his royal insignia, you know, had the royal sandals, the royal parasol, and such like. And he'd left all those behind when he went to see the Buddha out of respect for the Buddha. And King Pasenadi had lost them. His general had taken them away. And so he was left in the forest. And he probably gathered what was happening, that he was being deposed. What happened was the general went back and he gave those items to the king's son, Vidudaba, who then took over as king. Pasenadi, realizing what was happening, he started to make his way to his son-in-law and his nephew's kingdom, Ajatasattu, in the neighboring kingdom. Ajatasattu, who had deposed his own father, but yet was a friend of King Pasenadi. He made his way there with help from various people along the way. Just in that evening, in that night, and he got to the city. That city was called Rajgarh, and the gates were closed. And it was like a fortress. He couldn't get in. And so he spent the night in a hall outside of the city. And it's there that King Pasenadi passed away. So this teaching that King Pasenadi gave was given on the last day of his life, at the ripe old age of 80, his last encounter with his old friend and teacher, the Buddha. So I find this very touching. And I don't know. I think many people, when their time is up, they often have a sense of that. And I consider King Pasenadi that day suddenly thinking of the Buddha, remembering the Buddha, and seeking out the Buddha, that this was a very fine, a very wonderful last day in the life of King Pasenadi, even though one could say in worldly terms, he was just about to lose everything. Who cares, really? His heart at that point, at the end of his life, inclined towards the Buddha. There's a sutta in Samyutta Nikaya. So there's this whole chapter, as I mentioned, and put in the chat, of Kosala Samyutta, Samyutta number 3, section 3, all encounters between King Pasenadi and the Buddha. And on this occasion, King Pasenadi was deeply immersed in all his affairs of state. I'll just see what number it is. Yeah, 325. It's the simile of the mountain, Pabatupama Sutta. King Pasenadi was involved in all his business as a leader and a ruler, a judge and an executioner and a war maker. He was immersed in all of these activities and came to the Buddha. And the Buddha, knowing this, gave him this teaching. And he said to him, imagine, King, that a messenger, trusted messenger, were to come to you from the east and say to you, there's a huge mountain reaching up to the clouds that is coming this way. It is crushing everything in its path. And imagine, King, that another messenger were to come to you, running to you from the west with the same news of a huge mountain hurtling your way. And a messenger were to come from the north and a messenger from the south with the same news. A mountain reaching up to the clouds is coming this way at speed, crushing everything in its way. And the Buddha said, what would you do, King Pasenadi, if you heard this news? And King Pasenadi, again, when he considered death, when he put himself in that place, as we all should do, could do, would wisely do, every day, consider death. King Pasenadi was given that opportunity by the Buddha to open to the possibility of his demise, and he said immediately, should such a dire threat arise, such a terrible loss of human life, when human birth is so rare, what could I do but practice the teachings of the Buddha? Do skillful and good actions. So that's very beautiful, that this person, even though thoroughly enmeshed in samsara, was able to, when it came to the crunch on the last day of his life, and at the time of this teaching, to wake up to Maranasati, to wake up to the imminence of death, the inevitability of death, his heart inclined to the Dhamma. And so that's a very beautiful teaching, and I think I'll finish with that teaching. Considering the words of King Pasenadi, friends, considering the monuments to the Dhamma, and considering this beautiful teaching, let's remember the mountains are coming at us from all four directions. If everyone could bear that in mind, how much less harm and cruelty would be done, because we can be immersed in samsara, immersed in views and opinions and ideas about us and them and what's good and what's right and what's what's to be dealt with, what's to be destroyed, what's to be put right, and all these ideas that we may have, we can consider when it comes to the point, to reality, to the time of death, which is always now, to letting go, to the path of practice, when it comes to renouncing the world, when it comes to practicing the Dhamma wholeheartedly, all of that has to be put aside. It all flees. It's like a gremlin. When it's seen, it's very shy and it flees. Or it's like turning on the light in a dark room. All these ideas, all these half-formed notions of what's right and wrong have to flee when we open our hearts to the Dhamma. And to consider death helps us to recognize what's worth spending time doing, thinking, the words we would want to say, and to clean up, clean up. I think everybody who hurts and harms others, everybody who's involved in any kind of wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, we know it. And it behooves us then to wake up as soon as we can to the significance, of our every act, our every thought, our every word, and to clean it up. And King Pasenadi was someone who couldn't extricate himself. He could have ordained as a bhikkhu and renounced the world, but how difficult for someone in his position to do that. So he was very much in the world. Yet we can appreciate there was a heart that inclined to the Dhamma. And we want to disentangle ourselves from samsara, not feel that we have to be immersed in our everyday worlds, and open our hearts to the spiritual path as quickly as possible, because death is on its way. It's barreling towards us, even as I speak. Thank you for listening. I'm going to have a look and see if there's any wish to put in a comment or a question or a reflection at this point. Feel very free to do so, friends, because we've got about 10 minutes. I can feel my voice is going. Thank you again, everyone who's present. We'll say hi, Jayantha. Noon, good to see. Hello. And Bhumika. Rebecca has a question. Also, hi, Amarantha, if I didn't say before. Rebecca says, here we go. How is it that King Pasenadi could attain stream entry despite all the harmful activities he was engaged in throughout his life? Do you know, I'm not actually sure he was a stream enterer. I might be thinking of someone else. We'll have to look it up, friends. Look it up. Good question. Absolutely good question. I'm doubting now that he actually was a stream enterer. What I would say is that when one becomes a stream enterer, it's not really possible to do really overtly harmful actions or to say anything cruel or harmful. You can't do anything really significantly unwholesome. And there is then a question mark in my mind whether King Pasenadi was a stream enterer or not. Quite possibly not. So thank you for bringing that in, Rebecca. Homework, everyone. And I'll certainly be checking that out. Madeline says, yeah, I do love the sutta on the mountains closing in on us to encourage a sense of urgency. Did King Pasenadi leave it a bit too late? Yes, that's a feeling I have, this poignancy in the Majjhima 89, where it's his last day on there in the form of King Pasenadi in this life. And he's in a situation that's very painful, really. And it was, my understanding is that we can glean simply from the Pali Canon, simply from the suttas, that King Pasenadi was struggling in a way to maintain his position for quite some time before he was deposed, died. Actually, in a way, it was perhaps merciful that King Pasenadi passed away at the time that he did, not to discover that his son had usurped him. How painful for a father to have such an experience. But yeah, he was struggling to maintain his position because of having caused so much harm to people around him that naturally they would want to get some kind of revenge or some justice. Isn't it the case, friends, we can consider when nations, people, leaders seek to suppress and counteract, harmful attitudes in others through violence, through force, through suppression and oppression, the result is only more hatred, more vengefulness, more violence, more trouble. And, we just watch that happening in the world around us, that one cannot cure hatred with hatred, as it says in the verse in Dhammapada. Only through love can hatred be appeased. And this is a powerful statement and consideration for us always, isn't it? And it's a work in progress for most of us to meet hatred with not hatred, not wishing to separate out, wishing to turn away, wishing to ignore or deny, but rather to open our hearts to that hatred and to bring in loving kindness. It's the only way forward. Thank you, Madeline, for your comment. And yeah, good question. Madeline's asking, I wonder what sort of rebirth Pasenadi achieved. I don't know. Again, homework, everyone, because because I don't know if the Buddha said anything about King Pasenadi's destination. I've got a feeling, I could be wrong about this, but I've got a feeling he might have actually had quite a good rebirth as some kind of deva, but I'm really not sure. I always have to look these things up. Who knows? I don't think we know. And I think the person that I'm thinking of when I speak about the deva rebirth is quite possibly Anathapindika, who was a subject of King Pasenadi, wealthy landowner in Savatthi, the one who donated, who bought the park where the Buddha spent so much of his time in the second half of his life. Anathapindika, the great donor, the giver of a monastery. We have verses from the time that Anathapindika passed away. He became Deva and he visited the Buddha, and he gave there are some verses about that encounter. But King Pasenadi, I'm not sure. Mixed karma, yes, in his case. Just having a look to see if there's anything else. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. That is great. AI. Okay. AI says there's some evidence that King Pasenadi achieved stream entry. More research needed. Yeah. let's all do some research. And if anyone wants to make comments next week or whatever I'm speaking about on this subject, feel free, and we can share information. Okay, Madeline, another Pindika didn't kill anyone. No, indeed. No, absolutely. I think to be involved in killing in this lifetime, whichever lifetime it is such an unwholesome karma for us that it would be difficult to supersede that with positive, good, wholesome acts. What a heinous thing to do, to take a human life, or to be responsible in any way for depriving human being or human beings of life. Yeah. And Sud, hi Sud. Sud says, why didn't Buddha ever explicitly say Pasenadi attained stream entry? There you go. I actually think that was a mistake for me to say that, Sud. I don't think he did. I was mixing him up with someone else. I'm not even sure who. Apologies for that. There's one more. We've got like 4 minutes. I think I'll bring in just one more teaching from Samyutta Nikaya. There are so many, but there's a very sweet teaching I'll just finish with, where the Buddha encouraged King Pasenadi, to go on a diet. Many of you will know this teaching. It's called A Bucket Full of Rice. I think it's 313 in Samyutta Nikaya. And we get the impression with very few words in the sutta that King Pasenadi was overweight. He was obese. He's described as coming along to see the Buddha, puffing and panting. And it's said in this sutta that King Pasenadi was subsisting on, he would eat bucketfuls of rice at a time. So he was overeating quite significantly. We don't know how big the bucket was, of course, but you get the impression that he was overweight and overeating. And let's see if I can find, I might have. Yeah, here we are. So the Buddha gave King Pasenadi a teaching, and he just said to him on one occasion, without any prompting, he said a verse, and this is what the verse is. He said, when a person is always mindful, knowing moderation in eating, their discomfort fades, and one ages slowly, taking care of their life. I just like to point out, it's very interesting, where the Buddha says the discomfort fades when we eat in moderation. The Buddha says here, Vedana fades. So feeling fades. It's like eating in moderation produces less hunger, less discomfort, therefore, and perhaps also, friends, less delighting in the food. So there's less bombardment of the senses when we have moderation in eating. What a beautiful teaching. To be always mindful is to be moderate in eating, then discomfort fades and one ages slowly, taking care of their life. So out of respect for this human life, to live in this way. King Pasenadi, devoted to the Buddha, he had his wisdom. He said to one of his attendants, I want you to recite this verse to me, memorize it and recite it to me every mealtime. And that is what happened. And in this way, King Pasenadi reduced his intake gradually and lost weight, became very fit. And of course, he lived in the time of the Buddha to live to the age of 80 was a ripe old age. He had a full life, as did the Buddha. They both passed away the same year at the same age of 80. So, friends, I think that's enough. And don't see any more comments. Time's up. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for your attention, your wise attention. All good wishes to you. Let's finish by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha, with 3 sadhus together. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.